So let me start off. I got three things to talk to you about today. The first is the simple fact, and I'm going to show you some new data to show you that the structure of the European financial system is changing. That's the first and most important thing I want to talk to you about. I also want to talk to you about the post-Trump political dialectic, this idea that Trump was elected, there was a big Brexit problem, and then right after Brexit, everything went back to normal with the election of Emmanuel Macron. That's not true. So we need to be worried about that. Political risk is still a thing. And finally, I want to talk to you about three different forces moving us forward. The first and most important is monopoly rents, then cultural change, and then technology. So let's get straight into it. The first two charts here give you the real economy story. On the left-hand side there, you see the German business expectations and the business climate survey. This is what business managers think about the future, and you can see their expectations, roughly speaking, are back to where they were in 2007. Things are working really, really well. You heard your CEO talking about how we're starting to see double-digit returns in the super industry at the moment, and this is partly why. You can see Eurozone consumer confidence back up to around 2007 levels. Again, happy days. I happen to come from a country which endured about 5 years of austerity, and as you'll see in a little while, we're back to being happy again, despite the fact that we're deeply burdened with debt. And that is going to become a serious issue for us in the future. You can see Eurozone industrial production. Again, we've beaten the cycle. We're back to roughly where we were, 2014, 2015. And you can see the Eurozone unemployment rate. It's about 9.1% now. Now, of course, that masks huge differences throughout the Eurozone. In Ireland, the unemployment rate is just under 6%. Again, in 2011, that was 15%. But in Southern Europe, in Greece, in Portugal, in Spain, it's not uncommon to see youth unemployment rates above 30%, and even higher in some of the worst affected countries. So take that unemployment rate number with some significant quantities of salt. So that's it for the good news, I'm afraid. I got 3 slides in, but don't worry. I will take you into Mordor and back out to the Shire again. I promise. I'll do my best. I'll do my best, folks. It's early in the morning. We've all had a lot of caffeine. I think we deserve to be happy at the end of all this. So when we look at debt, credit to the non-financial sector, this is straight from the national accounts, expressed as a percentage of gross domestic product across the major markets. It's all higher than it was before the crisis. There has been no effective deleveraging. Now, it should not surprise anybody that in an era of almost free money, people took out lots of debt. That's not a surprising factor at all. What is surprising is that the major element of the national accounts you would expect to do the deleveraging, particularly the non-financial sector, hasn't. There hasn't been any, really. And this is a problem because it means debt levels are still very high, which means interest servicing costs are important, which means monetary policy is important. So we're also starting to see some really interesting divergences. And this is US data, but the European data is roughly the same. The personal savings rate expresses a year-on-year change, and the average hourly earnings rate, they're diverging for the first time in about 5 or 6 years. You can see the savings rate and average hourly earnings are moving away from one another. This is not a good sign. It's really not a good sign. If this pattern is replicated in countries like Australia, in the European Union, you have a serious problem because, of course, the savings rate is highly correlated with the amount that's invested. I love this chart. I love this chart. This is one of my favorite charts, I have to say. It's like a really, really crap game of chess or something. This is the net annual returns. This is a chart from BlackRock. Net annual returns by asset class. So you can see in 2016, small cap stocks, net annualized return, 21.3%. All the way to the bottom, cash, 0.3%. Not exactly that difficult. What strikes you from looking at this is that there is no discernible pattern. You can't really pick a winner based on where you are. If you invested in cash in 2001, you would have got a 4.4% return. And in 2016, large cap value stocks will give you 17.3%. Asset values have changed, portfolio strategies have changed, but there is no one winning strategy. I mean, that's a good thing, really. If it was, none of us would be here. this is sort of our job to figure this out. But what is really important, I think, from looking at this chart is a sense of the sheer complexity of what's going on and the idea that the system itself is actually changing. Okay, now a large part of this is, of course, the crisis of 2006, 2007. I mean, you can see in 2008, fixed income earned you about 5.2%. Cash was the next biggest one. If you had dividends on a portfolio, things were going badly for you. Small cap stocks, minus 33. Large cap stocks, minus 36. You'd want to be wearing the brown pants if you had that portfolio. And large cap stocks, minus 38.4%. And things have gotten better ever since, which is not surprising. That is what markets do. They adjust to changing circumstances. I want to show you some data now. This is a tree map. It's a tree map of the entire European financial system. It took about 7 hours to do on the plane on the way over. You're looking at about 4.92 million data points. Roughly 30 trillion euros worth of assets. This is exactly the kind of thing you need a 9-hour plane ride for, actually, is to think about whether you're going to do this. So all you're really looking at here is relative sizes. You can see the three economies you would expect to be very large in terms of their capitalization: the United Kingdom, Germany, and France. In 2008, and again in 2015, by size of asset, the United Kingdom is relatively larger, Germany, and then France. But now look at the smaller boxes. The Netherlands, they've got a very large pension industry. They also have a very, very large asset recycling industry. Luxembourg, Ireland, and Belgium. Now think about the population. Think about the population that's evolved. The population of Luxembourg, it's not that big a place. I think it's smaller than the population of Sydney. The population of Ireland, it's about the population of Melbourne. And yet they're up there. They're up there as financial centres with places like the Netherlands. That's not great. And you can see over the period the change in the fortunes there. Ireland has dropped down somewhat. Belgium's come up. But overall, the system looks stable from this perspective, right? It looks stable from this perspective. But now let's drill down just into the UK, just as an example. You can do the entire thing, and if you'd like, I'll email you the whole the whole exercise, which is a HTML file. This is just looking at the UK, just the UK on the asset side. You can do the liability side too. It's great fun. The only problem is you need to have a 9-hour plane ride to get the answer out, or a much better computer than the one I have. So financial corporations, again, not that surprising. Financial corporations are the biggest, monetary financial institutions, and then the rest of it. And then again, you can see the sizes are slightly different in 2015. But again, monetary financial institutions and other is just there. Drill down into financial corporations, and now you see a big change. Look on the left-hand side. In 2008. Financial dividends, employee stock options, and loans were the two biggest parts of their financial system in the financial corporate sector. In 2015, dividends are gone. They're not there anymore. They're just not a part of the system. They've been erased from the process. And they're a tiny amount now. You can see it's equity and investment fund shares, short-term loans, debt securities, currency and deposits, and transferable deposits. Again, it's basically cash and loans. It's gone back to kind of a 1970s, the 363 model of banking. Take deposits at 3%, lend out at 6%, hit the golf course at 3 p.m., which is the dream, in addition to obviously being at Disneyland for 16% of you, which is fine. So that's really, it's really interesting. The structure of the system has changed. The structure of the system has changed. Why has it changed? It's changed because of monetary policy. Remember the key constraint of the European Union. The European Union is an economic solution to a political problem. The political problem is, could we please stop France and Germany from shooting at each other? That's the political problem. The economic solution to that is, let's just have all of the big players in their economies be friends. And that's worked out really, really well. Except it's produced an oligopolistic market structure within the European Union. It's also created a deep democratic deficit, which Brexiteers exploited successfully in 2016. after 2007, it was really clear that fiscal spending and fiscal stimulus was the way forward. However, the ordoliberal politics of the European Union mean that it's almost impossible to do deficit spending, and the European Central Bank, unlike the Federal Reserve in the UK, or in the US rather, and the Bank of England in the UK, they simply weren't able to just print off a load of cash and hand it to the government. Monetary financing is illegal under Article 123 of the Maastricht Treaty. So what did they do? Well, the first thing that they did was they got an Italian to be the head of the European Central Bank. And what did they do? They found a way to do exactly what they were going to do anyway, which is monetary financing of deficits. So they did asset purchase programs, and what I'm going to bracket as quantitative easing, which is basically the way I think about quantitative easing is it's a way for the European Central Bank to get around monetary financing. It is able to help small states like Ireland reduce the yield that they expect to pay on their sovereign debt, and in so doing make the interest costs on these small sovereign states much more viable, and therefore cohere the European system. So it's a roundabout way of doing what the US just did under President Obama in 2008, 2009. So the first asset purchase program starts in 2015, and you can see the change in the outflows and ownership structures of long-term debt securities and short-term debt securities. So many people in this room will probably be long German bonds, or you'll probably be long Irish bonds, something like that. And mainly that's because of issues like this. The main thing I want to talk to you about today is that this is going to change. As Ali said, the European Central Bank meets tomorrow. At his speech in Jackson Hole, Mario Draghi, I think he used the words financial stability 27 times in his speech. So if I were you, I would start thinking very carefully about what this world looks like, or what that picture looks like after QE ends. Once it is no longer completely profitable to hold these bonds at any rate, what happens to the European system? What happens to countries like Ireland? What happens to countries like France, who are all deeply indebted, as I showed you already? They already have massive amounts of debt. If interest rates start to rise, what happens to this picture? And also, what happens to the fragility of these systems? It's a big worry. What I expect to see is a very, very, very slow taper. But that doesn't matter. People think you can pop a bubble slowly. You can't. Trust me, I am Irish. You cannot pop a bubble slowly. They just feckin' pop. So, what drove these yields in the past? So this is from Benoit Cœuré brilliant speech. If any of you haven't read it, read his last speech, his July 27th speech on this. This is from an ECB model. What drove yield? What drove asset returns in the past? It was yield, that yellow box. Now it's risk aversion. It's risk aversion. It's not yield anymore. That should not surprise you. Yields have collapsed. Why? Because of QE. What is going to drive this stuff in the future? Well, my personal opinion is that it's going to be risk aversion for quite some time because of one of the things is, you know, the perma-tanned tweeter in the White House, but a lot more of it has to do with the actual structure of the economic system. I think we all know now that Donald Trump's tweets and stuff like that are basically cheap talk. We shouldn't really take too much heed of them, as his own foreign secretary told us not to, which is, I think, a firing offense, but let's see. So risk aversion, big problem into the future. So, end of my first part of my talk. 1, QE changed the composition of the system. 2, QE is ending for all intents and purposes in 2018, and that implies a huge rebalancing of portfolios, and especially in equities and long-term bonds. What do your portfolios look like? Do you have buckets of European bonds? Did you buy a load of Italian bonds? How many people here are sitting on Turkish sovereign paper going, it'll be grand? Guess what? It won't. Actually, if you are buying, never mind, we'll get onto that later. Okay, that huge rebalancing, people think it's going to go slowly. I don't think it will. And if it does, it's going to expose the core vulnerabilities of the European system, which haven't been fixed. Okay, they haven't been fixed. Okay. The post-Trump political dialectic is stuttering. So the idea was, as Ali said brilliantly in her introduction, Trump happened, well, Brexit happened, then Trump happened, and then Emmanuel Macron happened. So everybody went, it's grand. It's okay. Not to worry. Everything's fine. It's all going to work out. The sane people are back in control. That's fine. Has anybody looked at nobody looked at Emmanuel Macron's policies too carefully. Emmanuel Macron is a fairly right-wing guy, and you can't be a right-wing guy in France. It doesn't work. I've been there for some time. It really doesn't work. The first time anybody talks about cutting anything in France, there's a strike and somebody sets a sheep on fire and sends it across the road. It's bizarre. It's really bizarre. I've never, ever been to France, but there hasn't been a strike somewhere on something. It's a remarkable place. Nobody looked at Macron's policies too carefully because they went, well, he's clearly not a white supremacist. So given the choice between a white supremacist and not that, let's go for that. Right? That's it. So once that happened, okay, fine. That worked out. No problem. Now he's saying, well, you know what, clearly what I'm going to do is I'm going to weaken the power of your labor unions, I'm going to change the structure of your system, and I'm going to make you all work much harder. Retiring at 55 is not necessarily the best option for you guys. And your average French person looked up from the paper in the morning and went, what? What? No, we don't like that. Macron's popularity is rock bottoming. We have the German elections coming up. Really expect Angela Merkel to be re-elected. She is the leader of the free world. Again, given the choice between re-electing the leader of the free world or not that, what would you choose? Okay? So, this dialectic is sputtering though. People have realized Macron is not the savior. We have the German election coming up, that should be a lock, but then right on its heels we have Italy. And then right on its heels again we have Finland. Finland's economy is similarly depressed, and not because of just Nokia. It's locked into the euro, which is a naturally deflationary currency. So that's not great. So what happens? A little overlooked country is Austria. People tend to forget 46.2% of the Austrian people voted for an actual Nazi. Not he plays fast and loose with the white supremacists. Oh, he failed to deny that they were white. No, he's like, Nazis are cool. I like Nazis. Vote for me. Almost half the population of Austria voted right wing. It doesn't really matter from a portfolio balancing perspective where these people are on a spectrum. The point is they all love populist policies, and they all think that populist policies are the way forward, which typically means, I didn't realize my point was that shocking. Are you okay? You right? You good? Right. Oh, it seems like the camera fainted. Okay, right. Well, if the people are okay, I'll keep going with the talk. The camera can reassemble itself. I'll have to tell my mother that I broke the camera on my first speech in Australia. That'll be, she'll love that. Right. If you were in Italy at the moment, people who wants a referendum on the EU and who would vote out? 58% of people in Italy want a referendum on the EU. 48% of them, without even a chat, would vote out. 55% of the people in France want a referendum on European membership. 43% in Sweden, and in Spain it's only 40%. Right? What you see here is this is a nascent Brexiteer vote. It's sitting there, and what you'll see if the people who want Brexit in the UK succeed, these numbers will grow, especially if they get a really good deal. Now, they are not going to get a really good deal. They are going to be hammered by the European Union, mainly because the Brits forgot how to negotiate, as I'll tell you in a little while. But you shouldn't think that the European system post-Macron is stable in terms of its politics. It's not. I really like this chart. This is from the Eurobarometer surveys. So it says, how optimistic or pessimistic are you about the future of the euro? In the EU 28, only 6% don't know, 44% are pessimistic. Like, if you just think about that, across the entire EU 28, 44% of the entire population of those surveyed by the Eurobarometer are actually pessimistic. Only 50%, just 50%, are actually optimistic about the future of the Eurozone. Now in Ireland, it's 77%. We love the European Union. Why? Because they give us the money. We love the money and they give us the money. In Britain, it's 42%. Only 42%, ironically, are optimistic. But if you look across Europe, you'd see a great split in how they think, individual countries think about the European Union and its project. Do not think it's stable. It's not. And there's great variation in there. So, we live in a world of profound change. Populism, inequality, low trust in institutions, protectionist sentiments everywhere, weak income growth, austerity, and of course, a consumer-driven society, which is a very different thing. But this is my favorite thing. You've all seen these on mugs and things like this. This is the exact approach Theresa May is giving to Brexit. Keep calm, carry on. The last thing they are is calm, and all they're doing is carrying on. It's a disaster. The Irish are seriously affected by Brexit. We will, as you know, Ireland is partitioned into the Republic of Ireland in the south, where I live, and the Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. There will be a hard border between the two, and the last time there was a hard border, we started shooting at each other. So we'd really not like that. The average Irish approach to Brexit has been this, right? Sure, it's grand. We'll be okay. We'll be okay. But guess what? Guess what? We won't. Brexit has been a big problem, right? Every presentation now needs an obligatory Brexit slide, and here's mine. It's really interesting comparing the negotiating positions of the two big parties. There's the EU, of which Ireland is the member, and there's the UK. These two groups, it's a bit like the best football team in the world playing a very, very mediocre team. The EU negotiators have just finished negotiating TTIP, and they finished negotiating the EU-Canada deal, both of which were torpedoed by Donald Trump. So you can imagine that they're super happy with him. But the UK haven't done a serious trade negotiation in decades. And you can see it. They're being hammered on every single point. Three things that matter right now. The size of the divorce bill doesn't matter. They're talking about 50 billion euros. That's neither here nor there in the context of a 2 trillion euro system. Second idea is people's rights post-Brexit. Does a British person who lives in Spain have the right to spend their time in Spain? And does an Irish person who works in the UK have the right to work there? That's going to get worked out too. The third big issue is the border between Ireland and the UK and Northern Ireland. That's not going to get worked out. That's a huge issue. The reason it's a huge issue is not because anybody cares about Ireland. Obviously they don't. If you live in Czech Silesia or Wallonia or Catalonia, you don't care about Northern Ireland or Ireland. But the reason it matters is because Ireland, as part of the 27 member states, has a veto on Brexit. We have a veto like every other country. So if it doesn't move to our satisfaction, we will stop it. That means Brexit will stop. That means the negotiations will stop. That means there will be a hard exit. And that means things like passporting rights change. Things like GDPR. Many of you will be aware of this. Many of you will have a substantial curse word associated with GDPR. It will be your problem. And all of a sudden, you'll have tariffs based on various products going in and out of the UK. That's going to cause a massive macro shock to Ireland, to the UK, and to most of Europe, if it does happen. And there's a possibility it will. So here's three ways to think about Brexit. One, in terms of its macro effects, nothing changes. Britain is not a world power anymore. It has been reducing in size since the Second World War. It is not important. It never was important. After about 1973, it really didn't matter for most things. To convince yourself of this, consult a chart of shipping lanes. All you see is Britain's influence in terms of world trade waning. In terms of macro-sectoral links, aggregators win. If you work in a co-op, happy days. If you can aggregate up loads of different products, like a mobile phone company or something like that, you can really win from Brexit. If you're a price taker, like anybody in agri-food, you're in really deep trouble. You're in really deep trouble. In terms of individual incentives coming from Brexit, it really depends on the change in prices and the change in costs. Import prices are going to rise as a result of a hard Brexit, but your wages might rise too. Consider the problem of sausages. I know we all love sausages. If you slap a British flag on some sausages right now, you could jack up the price and increase the wages for your sausage-making employees. That will work inside the UK. There's 60 million people there, 3 times the size of this country. So you can do that. But in the short term, can you last over the medium term with what is effectively a small open economy like the UK becoming less and less competitive over time? I don't know. I have 3 books for you to read because I'm an academic, so I want you to read stuff. Peter Mayer's Ruling the Void, Edward Luttwak's The Logic of Strategy, and Mark Blyth on Austerity. They're 3 brilliant books, and all 3 of them will help you understand what's happening in the world. Unfortunately, prayer is the current strategy for a lot of this stuff. I don't really mind what faith you are. I just don't think prayer is the right portfolio allocation approach. It may be. Maybe sprinkling chicken blood around and jumping up and down and stuff is the way forward. I don't know. But this is maybe wrong for asset managers. This chart is my plea for the welfare state. I was often asked during the worst years of austerity in Ireland by journalists, why aren't you guys rioting? You know, they're taking away your banks, they're taking away your sovereignty, and you're not rioting. And here's my answer. Many people ask, is it the weather? It's like, it's not the weather. You know, here's the change in the Gini coefficient, which is a measure of inequality. If it goes higher, things become more equal. And here's social expenditure. You see 2 big dots there, Ireland and Australia. Over this period, so this is the worst years of the crisis, the average change, Australia and Ireland kept relatively high. The welfare state is an incredibly important tool, not just of civilization, but also of social stability. The larger it is, the better it is. You have to think about it like a kind of a sponge for crises, okay? Any effort to weaken the welfare state weakens the entire state. I really want you to think about this. I'm aware of some of the political discussions in Australia at the moment. I've been reading into it as I plan to come live here for a year. You really need to start thinking carefully about what the welfare state means for you. Finally, in the last 2 minutes, there are 3 forces moving us forward. The first is monopoly rents. So you guys have an energy crisis at the moment. Why is this? Because you have an oligopolistic energy structure. You will continue to have an energy crisis as long as it's not somebody's problem that it get fixed. So monopoly rents, there are ex-ante indicators of high returns. Everybody wants to look for the next Google and so forth. And in the short term, that's a really good thing. In the long term, however, it weakens everything. So what you're looking at here is a correlation between changes in labor share and changes in industry concentration. The takeaway from this chart is the more powerful industry gets, the weaker labor gets, the weaker workers get. And who pays into pension schemes? Workers. So over the short term, this makes sense. You guys are like, well, okay, market concentration is probably good for us. Over the longer term, 50 years, workers being weaker and wage growth not keeping up with GDP growth means that this thing is very, very different. And you can see there a lovely chart. In 1980, the average markup was 18% above markup cost. In 2015, it's 67%. So somebody's making great profits, but guess what? That affects everything. Cultural change. Gig economy workers don't take out pensions. I've been in Brisbane for a while. I've been driving around in Ubers. It's been great fun. I've had great chats with all the Uber drivers. And I asked each of them, do you have a pension? And they all looked at me like I'd asked them, can you count to 3? Because they're like, no, we don't have pensions, Stephen. So you can see there, Australia is the third largest in the world in terms of the gig economy. As it gets bigger, people who are able to take out pensions get smaller. And finally, technological change is real, but chill out about it. Ajamoglu and Restrepo, two of the best economists in the world, found 6.2 workers are losing their job for every robot included in a metropolitan area from 1973 to 2007. But new jobs are being created. They're just not low-skilled jobs, okay? So you have to invest in education to overcome this. Australia's education system is excellent, but maybe some thinking about STEM in particular, where Australia is quite weak, might be really, really helpful. And finally, some takeaways. The structure of the system is changing. Portfolio rebalancing is a medium-term problem. The post-Trump political dialectic is sputtering. This means the structure can't be assessed over the medium term. It can't be assumed. So there's a big risk aversion to EU assets, I think, going forward. And finally, the forces moving us forward, searches for monopoly rents, cultural changes in technology. Worry about searching for the rents and scanning for cultural changes. Chill out about the robots. Just educate your kids better. Thank you very much.
Stephen, thank you. As a journalist, I love the fact that the quintessential questioning of the taxi driver has now become the quintessential questioning of the Uber driver as a sign of how things have changed. In your talk, take the unemployment rate with a big grain of salt, lack of deleveraging, no one winning strategy, Macron is no saviour, nascent Brexiteer vote in Europe and pessimism across the board. Why on earth would we put any money in Europe?
So there are three reasons. One is it's a massive market. Many people will use Italian sovereign bonds, for example, as a liquidity hedge. That's still a great idea. You should still do that. The question is, should you do that with the kind of frequency that you were doing it before? Another really good question is, where are the growing economies? So if your fund needs to make 3% real or 2% real or whatever it is, and you're looking around, you're hunting for yield. Many people have simply searched for, property, Irish property markets or REIT investments, or people have been looking at lots of real estate investment in Spain. Lots of things like that, particularly capital investment opportunities, muni bonds, that kind of thing. And that kind of stuff is still there. There is still yield out there. The problem is you can't assume that it's one contiguous system, which it's not.
We've got some mics that are roaming the floor, but so do put your hand up if you've got a question and a mic will come to you. But we do have a couple that have come through on the app. This one's got quite a lot of likes, so obviously a lot of people in the room are interested. Globally, there is $215 trillion of debt on public and private balance sheets. Can this ever be repaid without severe austerity and without mass civil unrest?
No.
Okay.
Here's the key thing about debt. The key thing about two key things about debt. One is that it really doesn't matter as long as the person giving it to you doesn't want it back. And if you can refinance your debt, then neither the stock nor the flow of debt matters. What matters is your ability to use your current income as it comes in to service the debt going out. An economist called Hyman Minsky, whose 1986 book you should all read, called Stabilizing an Unstable Economy, described this system as what's called Ponzi finance. Speculative and then Ponzi. So speculative finance is you take in money and then you lend it out the back door as quickly as you can do that. That's cool. That's fine. But the moment that you're taking in money and you can't even use that to service the interest costs, then it becomes a Ponzi scheme. The key issue here is if you imagine this as a game of musical chairs, where are you when the music stops? That's really the only question. Again, as I learned during the Irish crisis, you don't want to be the one without the chair when the music stops.
Another question here, you talked about technology and the idea that jobs will change and that we need to educate our kids better. Technology will result in increased permanent unemployment. Capitalism doesn't deal well with paying people to do nothing. Is a universal basic income inevitable?
So capitalism does...
That's a rather pessimistic question.
Well, no, actually, so the universal basic income idea, for those of you that aren't fully up on the idea, is the notion that eventually there will be mass unemployment because robots will be able to do everything better. And so but that means that there's going to be democratic decohesion because of all these unemployed people. They'll just allow a demagogue to smash a demagogue will get elected to smash the robots, that's fine. Or you could just tax the people who own the robots at 75% or something.
And hand it to the people who don't have the jobs.
This, believe it or not, was prefigured in a comic book called Judge Dredd. In Judge Dredd, if any of you have read the comic book, that's exactly the world that he describes. It's the universal basic income. It has a very left-wing idea that's constant redistribution, but the result is actually quite a right-wing thing, which is deeply disempowered 99% of the population. I see it as an issue, but we should remember that the capitalism does pay people to do nothing pretty much most of the time, right? You think about farmer subsidies, for example. It's not do nothing, but it's do less. Keep the prices where they're supposed to be. There are lots of those. You can imagine a situation where people have a lot, but they're happy with their lot in life. Then a universal basic income makes sense. But if you don't have something to strive for, I think people would get very, very depressed. So I'm not a huge fan of it. I'd rather smash the robots first.
I've got a question I want to finish with, because I just wonder whether you agree. This is a statement that was made recently by a global strategist based in New York. And he was making the point that for much of the post-GFC period, US money, Chinese growth and European politics have been what matters. Now it's US politics, European growth and Chinese money. Do you agree?
I agree. I absolutely agree. The only problem is I don't understand China at all. I had a bet. My brother works for a big bank in London, and he transacts a lot of money. And I had a bet with him on Brexit. I thought Brexit would fail. He thought it would go through. He was right, and I was wrong. I thought Trump would get elected. He didn't. I was wrong. I was right, and he was wrong. And on China, last year, the year before, we were hearing discussions about, the Chinese economy, it's overheating, the household sector is hyperextended. And I said, aha, this is the Minsky moment for Chinese property. And he said, do you want to bet? I said, sure. And I said, no, Hyman Minsky said, this is the way forward, absolutely. And he said, no, Chinese institutions, you just don't understand them. And I said, no, Minsky was right. I was wrong, he was right. They were grand. Why? Because their institutional structure is different, and I genuinely don't understand it.
Please thank Stephen Kinsella.
Thank you very much.